The Lord be with you.
And
Also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, ruler of all things in heaven and earth, hear our prayers for this parish family. Strengthen the faithful, arouse the careless, restore the penitent. Grant us all things necessary for our common life, and bring us all to be of one heart and mind within your holy church. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you all for being here once again. I'm just going to see if Barbara has not received, at least I haven't seen that. And so today, if you want to text her, or, yeah, that'd be great. Today, we are going to talk about what a parish is. Last week, so the first week, let's review, we looked at the history of the church from Thomas Cranmer and the first prayer book of 1547 or 9. I always get mixed up because there was a second one, and I think that one was in 1549, and that was, Terry, why don't you come up here, because then it'll be easier for you to hear. I would really request that. It'll help me not have to yell. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll move over here.
You've got two more people, so you have.
We've got a few more people. So Terry, come on here, and they'll get us chair.
In the peanut gallery. It'll be in the peanut gallery.
They'll be in the peanut gallery. Great.
Needed to build new homes and stores come from all over the globe. With tariffs in place, it'll start costing more to get those products here,
There.
such as remodeling Habitat for Humanity and Champlain. Concerns over safety.
Great, thank you. You guys have chairs back there.
Here's the popcorn.
I love it.
Microwave.
So we started with the beginning of the prayer book and King Henry VIII in the middle of the 16th century. And through essentially the beginning of the Episcopal Church and the Revolutionary War, and the very first time that the Episcopal Church met in 1791 and ratified our first prayer book, because the way we pray, right, is what defines us as Episcopalians, and that's the Book of Common Prayer. After that, then the next week, week 2, we studied or looked at from the beginning of the nation at the Revolutionary War through to today, but we primarily looked at the broader church, the Anglican Communion, and the beginning of why we are at the very beginning of the denomination. And again, the history of the prayer book and how it led us to today. Last week, we looked at the structures of a diocese and why. So the word Episcopal means bishop. We are not a congregational church. And so a part of that very beginning in the late 19th century was that 18th century, sorry, we needed to differentiate ourselves from Roman Catholics and Protestant Congregationalists. So we put ourselves as bishop people, okay? But we're Protestants, the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America. That itself has changed a number of times as we have changed our life as Episcopalians, because congregationalism is drastically, the way in which we understand denominations have changed, and the Episcopal Church is no longer in the United States. We have dioceses in 9 countries or more, and including territories, Guam, Puerto Rico. We also have a church in Mexico, Haiti,
Israel,
We have a church in Israel. We've got that's right. Thank you. No, we have no churches.
No.
That's the Anglican Communion. The Episcopal Church, that's which is underneath the Episcopal Church and our presiding bishop. Also includes Ecuador, Colombia, Peru.
Okay, we have no, here, we have those plastic.
Yeah, those are our non-continental United States underneath the American governance. Okay, so we have these. Taiwan is in the Episcopal Church, quote, of the United States of America. Last week, like I said, we looked at why bishops matter. Because the smallest unit of governance in the Episcopal Church is not a parish. It's a diocese. Okay. Reason
There it is.
we had talked about why bishops have been so central to the Christian faith ever since the biblical times. The bishop is the head. The difference between Rome is they have a pope, which oversees, right? And then a curia, which oversees, so on and so forth. In the Episcopal Church, in the Anglican, the Episcopal Church, let's stay there, the diocese is central and the primary level of teaching and doctrine. So much so, okay, think about our country when it comes to states' rights versus federal, right? We're in a fight around this these days, as we all know. And so the Episcopal Church, has the same, I do want to call it a battle in some respects, but the diocese, which would be equivalent, right, to the states from General Convention, that's equivalently equal to Congress, is, let's take women's ordination and the ordination of gay, lesbian individuals. When and gay marriage or marriage equality. When all three of those things took place, there was always an out, took place at the national church. The national church had to make those approvals through resolution, okay? Then they go into the canons, the canon law of the Episcopal Church. But there was always an out, ready for this, for a bishop to order their diocese in semi-contrary to those resolutions and those canons. And they were binding, but you had two ways to be bound to them. Do it or not do it. Okay? I mean, we're much more Articles of Confederation, right? States' rights, dioceses, and bishops specifically, because they're the head of the diocese, head of the church, had a lot more authority over implementation of them. For example, a bishop was not required, and even to this day, is not forced or mandated to ordain women. They are not forced or mandated to ordain gay and lesbian individuals. What they are required to do is make sure there's an opportunity for that person to be ordained if he or she won't do that ordination in their diocese. So let's go to the Diocese of Albany, our neighbor across the Lake Champlain. The Bishop Love, which is the most previous bishop, was the last bishop to not allow marriage equality in his diocese. One, that's not true. Not allow marriage equality in his diocese. What he also would not do is allow for the opportunity for it to happen. Okay, you see the difference. And so the National Church, and he was one of them at that time, decided to do a thing. Roger, you're smiling because I think you know a bit about this, called deputy episcopal oversight, something of this nature, delegated episcopal oversight, depo. And a parish could apply to their bishop for depo so that a bishop of the other diocese would do their visitations, would do their episcopal visitations and those types of things. Our bishop, Bishop Ely, that is, when Bishop Love was in Albany, oversaw two parishes, one in Saranac Lake and one in Essex, New York, not Essex, Vermont, obviously. And another bishop in the southern and east-western part of that diocese did others there. They have a new bishop. He allows them both. He allows LGBTQ clergy people to be present in who they are, not just hiding in the shadows. And secondly, this new bishop has licensed his clergy to perform same-sex weddings, same-gender weddings. The Diocese of Central Florida, which is it's the center of it, where the cathedral is in Orlando. Okay. He allows women to serve. There are women clergy throughout the diocese. He does not allow openly and married LGBTQ clergy, nor does he license it to be done in the diocese. But he does allow that one thing and works with clergy in Southwest Florida and Southeast Florida to ensure there is an avenue for LGBTQ married couples to be married. Okay, this is what I mean. It's this fight balance in church, in states' rights versus federal law in the national church. So the diocese is central, not the parish. Any questions before we move on? Yes, David.
In my former parish,
Yes.
we had two good friends in our group, two young men, that went to the Episcopal Church in Northborough.
Yes.
Okay. And they wanted to get married. Okay.
Correct.
The church in Northborough refused that.
Yep.
Okay. So they came to our church where they knew that they would be welcomed, which they were, and they were married in our church.
Yep.
And everything worked out fine.
So let's talk about that one. Good question, David. And then, Roger, did you have your hand up?
No.
So not only do bishops have that right, okay, parishes and clergy, parish clergy, have the right to also say, no, I won't perform the wedding of a same-gender couple. Okay? And a vestry can say, we're not going to support this. In the same exact way, though, the priest will say, go talk to the bishop, or they will say, go talk to this parish over here.
Or another close by someplace.
Right, to do the wedding. So again, we have this parish clergy, priests, rectors specifically, have still a lot of authority over these pieces. They are not mandated to hire a social except that are LGBTQ, because deacons are placed by bishops. They don't have to do weddings of LGBTQ people. The way the resolution says is you have to open opportunity for them to be married.
They give them an out.
Correct. Right. They give them an out. That's exactly what it is. And it's not, it sets up a hierarchy, right, in really unhealthy ways.
So what about a person who is trans and their partner who is male or female, and so it's not considered like the same sex with just all the many changes? Is there anything that says, at this point?
So it all fits underneath that same roof, okay, that same canon, that the bishop would, if there is an issue, the bishop would make a final determination, because that's how it would go. And most people who are not in the Episcopal Church, we are 90% white, maybe 85% white. I don't know the exact. Barbara's coming on.
They don't,
Thank you, Deb.
the AME thing that usually with a black.
Well, so in the Episcopal
They
Church,
almost
we
merged.
do have African American churches, primarily Hispanic churches, deaf churches, Caribbean churches, so on and so forth, Japanese, Asian, different Asian congregations, but we are 90% white, WASP congregation, right? That's our denomination. And so when it comes to questions like this, we're dealing with a very strong majority that has designed a church to only favor the majority, right? Now, the Episcopal Church, as we know, has been really wrestling with these issues. Everything from power to cultural authority to privilege. I am, hold on, let me think here. Of the full-time clergy in this diocese, me being one of them, myself and the priest in Middlebury are the only two male clergy, full-time paid clergy people in the diocese. There are a number of other part-time paid clergy people. The other 6 parishes that have full-time clergy are women and gay women. So this diocese holds a very different ethos than the diocese of Western Massachusetts, David, which is where you were prior to Bishop Fisher, who you knew. That bishop wouldn't allow marriage equality, and so we're dealing with a culture that really wrestles with itself more than anything else.
So that's interesting, if I may interject, because then my former parish, I didn't realize was as liberal as it was, because we had two or three Afro-American families.
Yep.
And we probably had 10 or more LGBTQ, and a couple of them were couples that were married.
Yep. And that you would find that in parishes, right?
Right.
But you weren't going to find it diocesan-wide, right? And this is where the fights really took place at the diocese of who's welcome and who's not welcome. And obviously it would filter down here. St. John's is an interesting, if we can move a little bit to the parish, which I'd like to talk about, was the first parish in this diocese to have 6 women succeeding women as rector. Okay. The first female rector was installed in 1993. Okay. Women had been able to be ordained for 15 years. Vermont had always had women from before it was legal. However, St. John's is the first parish to go back to back. Jody Cardasis Dower and then Mary Mansfield. And then me, right? Kind of a reversal back in some respects to the old guard. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I'm an old guard, but I certainly fit some of those stereotypes. Some, not all. Yep.
Interesting how things
And
fights have
that's right.
changed.
St. John's prior to so I'm going to go back even a little bit further. 1922 is when the bishop in the diocese named St. John's, it was St. John's Episcopal Church in Stowe, as a mission church. What's a mission church? A mission church is small enough that it cannot, in those days, truly support a rector or a vicar at a full or part-time manner. They did not have a building to worship in. So a mission was everybody else. It could not be self-sustaining. Okay. Over the years, that definition of mission and parish changed, but we're a part of that. Come 1954, I'm going to show you something here. Roger, those of you online, I'm going to screen share. Now, hold on. Can you all see the parish website online? Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So up here in the corner of our parish website in About, you will see our history. Okay. So there are two things. Deb and I play a major part in this first one. You'll see Deb. It's a video, a YouTube video that was done, I saw in 2019, about who we are as a congregation. Now, it's from then, so we don't have a COVID experience and since then. But, so I invite you to watch that. Roger and Sue, you're on it too. The three of us make a strong presence. Do you remember that, Roger? You and Sue?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Zarina. And then here's our history.
19 what?
What's that?
When was this made again?
The video?
Yeah.
2019. So this is our quick history. So we always wonder about buildings. We talked about buildings and property. In the second paragraph, you'll see here, in 1954, the diocese purchased West Branch Schoolhouse to be used as the church building for St. John's. The diocese bought us the building. You don't hear about dioceses purchasing buildings, but we were a mission church. It changes everything. You'll also note that a couple things. In January 1st, 1955, we opened. It was the first time we were a building, a mission. It says here that we had a lay vicar, meaning we had a lay person overseeing the life of the parish. Again, an old model. And they would have morning prayer until a priest came, right? We'll say, maybe it was every 6 weeks, maybe every 2 months. And that's how they prayed. You see here, January 17th was the first annual meeting. And the first marriage was conducted in January for a woman named Alice Harding.
Really?
Yep. Who
My word.
her mother was the second musician at St. John. And
Alice's mother was.
Alice's mother, no, Alice was the second musician of the parish and served until Audrey took over for good in 2005. Has she always been since you were here?
Yeah, well, Alice was for the first,
Okay. So as soon as Alice retired
Right.
somewhere in 2005,
Yeah.
2006,
Audrey.
became the second, the third musician ever
Right.
at St. John's.
Audrey had always been, ever since I came to the church in 1998, she played the organ.
She was
assisting intermittently.
Right, intermittently until Alice retired. I sadly and joyfully presided over the funeral, Alice's funeral, and she is in our memorial garden in 2012. So you'll see here some of the strong beginning. They did a lot more work. There's a much deeper dive into our history. In 1965, St. John's called the first vicar. So, excuse me, a vicar is a rector in a mission. So we were still a mission. We were in this building, Marcus Hall. In fact,
In this building or the one?
in the old building on this property, yep, was the first, what we call settled clergy person, called to live in the community and serve this community. He stayed until 1980. His time period in this parish was Well, he's a clergy person. It always comes with its ups and downs. It always has its challenges. So Marcus Hall came in as a married man, pretty old school, low churchman, right? Say morning prayer 3 times a month, like we talked about on Sunday. Holy Communion once a month, whether you needed it or not, and was of a class of society of moneyed, the moneyed class. And so, hello, Fritz. Hey, Fritz. And so he was able to attract, and did, because of his social circles, a lot of the old Episcopalians that moved here, that had some money. Then he got divorced.
Marcus Hall got
Okay,
divorced.
Marcus Hall got divorced.
I think he
and this
married
was-
Michael and not.
This was, in those days, very, very controversial. I'm surprised that the bishop allowed him to stay.
Right.
Okay. And then he went on what was called a Crescio retreat. Crescio was a renewal movement in the Episcopal Church. Weekend retreats for men and women, independent of one another, a time to meet Jesus. Have you ever been on a Crescio weekend? I was, Roger, you and Sue have been on Crescios. Yep, you're on mute, just so we can't.
I had a dog getting psychotic with the FedEx man. Sue and I both attended a Crescio, and then both of them participated in my case, up to about a dozen being a presenting weekend. It happens in different places. It would spread like wildfire and then die out. We initially went in Maine and then in Massachusetts. And I think you'd have a hard time finding a local place that has one now. Very
Yeah.
powerful.
You can't get them. You don't find them very often now. Hold on.
No,
I may have screwed up here. Hold on. Oh,
I got everything.
hold on. Hold on, everyone. I screwed up. Oh, shoot. Hold on. I'm sorry, everyone. Oh, here we go. Okay. So he had this renewal movement experience, right? It is really a time to meet Jesus in a way that our local parish churches, especially in the nice, comfortable state Episcopal Church, doesn't often allow, right, Roger and Sue?
Right.
And I was a part of one for youth when I was a child or in high school, and it really affected my faith and really brought it to life.
What do you call it again?
Is Crescio. It comes out of the Catholic tradition, and don't ask me to spell it. I can't. Sorry, I wish I could. And then he remarried Marcus Hall,
Priscilla Hall.
Priscilla Hall. Vestry members may remember we received a bequest from her estate. Marcus Hall is the guy who's on our windowsill. We were given a bust of him, Roger and Sue, and he's right over here overlooking everything we do.
And he also used to.
Yes, with a construction. Yes, and he started the Mountain Chapel, which you'll see up here.
Which is where my kids were married.
And you'll see it right up there, yes. And so Marcus Hall also ushered in the new prayer book, but he had to leave. It was time for him to retire, and I think it was too hard for him. Then St. John's called a vicar. His name is Jim Raines. And the parish had a vicarage, i.e. a rectory for a vicar. Let's talk about parish structure under a vicar. It's called not a vestry, okay? It's called a bishop's committee, because the bishop is the rector of a mission. And so you can see here why the diocese would buy a building. A bishop places vicars. So the bishop of that day, I think Bishop Butterfield maybe, or Bishop Van Dyke, one of the two, placed Marcus Hall because in 1970, General Convention dispelled the canon of bishops placing priests and parishes calling priests. So you can see here some change in the way parishes function. So by 1980, the parish pulled together its very first search committee. They called Jim Raines. He was a beautiful man. I have actually met him 2 or 3 times. He now has advanced Alzheimer's, which is very sad. He lives down in Virginia or North Carolina. However, a couple things. St. John's then applied, what you do as a mission is you apply to diocesan convention to attain parish status. In the old days, it meant you had to be fully self-supporting, 100%. You did not need any, in those days, you could get support from the diocesan financial structures. St. John's could stand on its own, even with a part-time clergy person. So they did. They had the vicarage, and under Jim Raines, it became a parish, and therefore he transitioned into being a rector. Okay. So those are the names of why, very different than in the English church. English church, they do not use, they have a rector that oversees a regional area. Okay. It is that will have vicars in small parish churches that report to him or her. Okay. And the rectory, the rector may have the largest parish in that region in a deanery. Okay. So, and then there's a bishop and so on and so forth over there. We don't have that structure.
So it's only a parish that has a rector.
Correct. And a rector has tenure. The moment they're designated, called by a parish, approved by a bishop, a rector has tenure like a professor. A parish cannot, at their will or vote, simple vote, remove a rector. It's a very long, arduous process. We pray that it never has to happen. Yes.
Going back in time when we had the missions and the bishop basically was the priest or the vicar.
Yep.
Right?
The bishop appointed a vicar.
Okay.
Yep.
But the bishop had more or less control over each individual parish.
He had a lot more when it was a mission.
How much time did the bishop spend in going to those parishes?
No more than they do now. Okay, that's why they would appoint a priest. So they would appoint the priest to be that person, but they do have more power to come in and do things in a mission church versus in a parish. They have very little power in our day-to-day life. We have a lot more autonomy. Correct, a lot more autonomy. Yes.
A vicar is also a priest.
Yes.
But those names are interchangeable.
Well, what I continue to see here, and I don't know the history, Deb, we had a lay vicar. So a vicar and a rector oversee the day-to-day life of the congregation. A rector must be a priest, cannot be a deacon. It must be a bishop, because a bishop is a
You
priest.
enjoying this?
Mm. Mm.
And then you have the bishop is the rector of a mission, and then therefore a bishop. That's okay. It is confusing. So when there's two parishes, there's 2 statuses, right? And so a bishop appoints a priest in a mission church. A parish calls a priest in a parish. It's a way to think of that. Then once a rector is chosen, he or she has tenure in the parish and oversees the spiritual components and life of the church.
Appointed Lisa Ransom to the Mission Church in Killington,
Correct, because it's a killing, correct, because it's a mission,
the mission.
correct. And if the bishop wishes to, they can remove that person. Unlike the bishop cannot remove me. That's
Why
how
would they appoint someone if they didn't want them to stay there?
he started before the bishop, the current bishop arrived. So, and it really is disaster politically if a bishop chooses to pull a priest out of a parish,
Especially when there's no one to replace.
especially, right? And a very wonderful parish that is thriving. So the bishop, like we talked about before, has a lot of power. These are some of the places the bishop has power and the bishop doesn't have power. The bishop cannot come into St. John's and tell us what to do. She cannot walk in or he walk in and remove me. Now, minus two things. A priest can be removed at any time for moral inturpitude, right? Financial or otherwise. The other reason they can't be removed is if after a series of meetings and conversations with the bishop and the vestry requests that person after a lot of work, the bishop, the vestry, and the priest made what's called dissolve the pastoral ministry. Okay. So that's, but it has to be, it's under duress, and long-term work. It's kind of like the parish and the rector are a married couple. So you got to go through a lot of marriage counseling before you get a divorce. To use that.
So it's only the bishop that can say so long, who says so long, farewell to the priest. The vestry, the congregation cannot do that. It's the bishop has
Independently.
the final say.
In other words, if we don't like you, we can't say out the door, we have to go
To the bishop, correct.
and say,
That's
and
right.
if the bishop says, forget it,
And that happened. Okay,
And that's what almost happened
that
with Jody Carday.
Jody Cardasis, right? So Jody Dower Cardasis, who you will see now. I'm gonna
Can I
scroll
ask a
up.
question quickly? Is there any kind of probationary, kind of like if you hire someone, sometimes people interview beautifully and then they obviously are not a good fit. Is there any like a 3 months or 6 month trial before you get tenure?
Okay, so let's talk about that for 2 seconds. Because it's not that easy, Barbara. Technically, as soon as literally, the canons say, as soon as the parish calls and the bishop approves, there is nothing other than tenure.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
A lot of parishes and bishops are encouraging parishes that are searching for another priest to call what's called a priest in charge. I don't like the name. We used to call priest in partnership, doesn't matter. Priest in charge. And that is what's called a time certain. Okay? So like you're saying, Barbara, they are signed a letter of agreement with the parish for 3 years, usually is kind of the standard for this reason, right? Because you can't just do a 3-month trial with a clergy person. You can do 3 years is a good time, right? Do your working styles work well together? 2 things happen. You either, the priest, I'm talking as the priest here, so I apologize. The priest either chooses to leave and find another parish. The parish, without consultation with the vestry in the parish can do its own kind of secretive work and say, we're not going to renew your contract. Or they come together and they say, we like this so much, we're going to transition to being a rector. Your tenure. Now, that's actually very common in the Diocese of Vermont. St. John's did not call me under those circumstances, but that is pretty common throughout our diocese when priests are being called as rectors. The studies have shown, however, and this is an interesting piece. In 1970, as I said, the bishops stopped appointing clergy priests to congregations. At that time, 30% of calls were not good. They failed. Then when they transitioned to parishes calling clergy, so for 50 years, about 30% are failures. So it really doesn't matter in the long run what we've experienced in this transition. Failures and successes. That still means 70% of congregations and clergy came to were very successful.
That doesn't seem any different than the way it is.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And so, Barbara, to your point, this is exactly why there's that quote out opportunity if a parish chooses to do a priest in charge.
Why would a parish not do that? What would be the downside?
Stability. The
Mhm.
church lives on a culture of stability. It also allows, because if it's a priest in charge, the bishop can walk in. The bishop can walk in and do a lot more because you don't have a rector. And so in struggling dioceses or parishes that don't like the bishop or want a permanent priest, there's reason to do a rector. And normally it always works out. So one example is when I arrived in 2010, I think in 2011 or 2012, I forget, Christchurch Montpelier called a priest in charge, priest in partnership role. It worked great for 3 years. And this guy had been in business, in a business financial world setting. And he said, I don't want to be rector because I don't think it would be good for Christ Church. So they renewed it for another 5 years. And they dissolved it at the end of 5 years. He needed to be on his way, so on and so forth. But it really was useful. So Barbara, to your point, there is a use for that. And it has done good things for certain churches. In most parishes, just our culture as a denomination, rectors are the desired role. I'm not saying it's the right.
You would hope it would work out, but we had, in my Lutheran church, we had one very painful, problem, and it is difficult to get a pastor to leave as it is a priest. It's different, but it's still difficult. So I don't think that Emmanuel would ever again, let themselves get in that position.
And that's why the church has worked hard at allowing exactly that, Barbara, right? Because there are reasons for it. And some clergy want to be a priest in charge for that exact reason too. They want to do a 3-year probationary dance, or they want 3 years in a congregation, so on and so forth. Some priests walk in and say, no, I'm not going to look at a church if it's not a rectory, if it's not a rectorate.
That's what I think is probably stops parishes from doing it, that a pastor doesn't want to be on the chopping block there.
Parishes make the decision before they extend a call. Before any job descriptions, parish decides themselves, and then they only call back role. So it does not happen at the time of signing contracts. That happens before a parish interviews as their first interview.
Thank you.
So this is very good because St. John went through this. So at the end, about 2000, Jody Cardasis Dower was the rector. It started to go sour pretty darn quickly from the very beginning. Lots of strife between her and the laity. And those who are still here, which are not very many, will remember that. And I don't want to drudge up that history. Know that it wasn't very good. However, what happened and ensued was that groups within the congregation and the vestry started to meet behind closed doors. Very unhealthy, right? They wrote the Bishop Mary McLeod, Mary Adelia McLeod, the very first diocesan female bishop in the Anglican Communion. And kept saying to her, please remove her. You will remember this,
Well,
or,
I can say that as a newcomer in 1998, I did not know anything of this, of what was really going on, but I could just feel that there was unrest in church services. And it's like people who were against Jody, believe it or not, I recall, would sit on the left side of the sanctuary and sort of in a congregation there.
yep,
And people who, like me, heck, I was, I singing in the little choir, I would just go up front and I could, and then people who were not included in that of sort of like old school of people who were against Jody's contemporariness. To me,
Is that what it is? Deb, what was the kind of general, like, not to get into specifics, but why didn't they like her in a general sense? What was the rub?
my sense and remembering this was that she was too contemporary. She was a woman.
Oh,
I think that her being a woman really had something to do with it.
yes.
Her starting of, so like, Belle Sanders was very in favor. There were many women who just loved Jody
Yep.
because she really, kind of the best in women, and not just that women were just the stewards in the church and taking care of so much in the church, but were really developing a spirituality. So I feel that in many ways, now Barbara Barrow might not agree with
Exact
me at
opposite.
all,
Okay.
but it was a time of a lot of spiritual development as well as religious development, where to me the church in so many ways had been more predominantly, or had been more of a religious focus. Although Dan Riddick, from what I remember hearing at the time, was a very contemporary individual. However, he was male.
He was. And another part of this, Deb, if I can jump in here, Jody Cardace's Dower was blamed for robbing the small reserve funds. He was, because the church wanted to build a new building, and under her tenure, because of what now, these are biased perspectives, right? Took everything out of the endowments and of the reserve fund so she could be paid more money. Now, Terry whispered, I don't know if you all heard it, she was ahead of her time. And because of her ability to raise up the role of women, she's a teacher.
He was into social issues.
No, she was into women.
Oh, women.
Right.
Women and empowering women and children. She was in elementary. It is, but in today's world, that means right front row and children. So she was raising up a children's ministry and young families. So there was this side of some very positive stuff that is progressive. A lot of the feeling about her, first in that feeling sense, right? There's that. The negative feeling is she demanded to be named Mother Jody.
I was just going to ask what you called her. Did you call her mother? That's a tough one.
It was Mother Jody.
Yeah.
And so there was this, they went from Dan Riddick, who went by Dan.
Oh, I see.
He might be known as Father Dan, but I think he really was like, I'm Dan, enough of that. Okay. Then they get their first woman, and she demands to be called Mother.
I forgot that she did. I didn't know. I'm not sure that I
So you take that emotional component, and then the feeling by all vestry members at the time that she wanted to raid and was raiding reserve funds.
Well, that would be a good reason to get rid of her. I mean,
So,
you
well,
need
what
good honesty.
And again, the parish can't fire her or vote for her to leave. They have to wait for the bishop to act. And what happened was they sent a letter, I don't know, somewhere around 2000, 2001. Okay. It was 2001. And 2 months later, Jody took a call in Brooklyn. And the bishop had wrote them, things are gonna, who knows, right? I mean, it was very coy. It was not good. And so what the bishop did is she placed in a priest in charge manner another clergy person, Mother Mary Mansfield, Mary Mansfield. She went by both, right? I think she was primarily Mary, but people loved her so much they might get.
She was predominantly
Interesting,
called
they would
Mother
do another
Mary.
woman.
And,
She
you know, an older woman, children were already grown and out of the nest, and then Dick came along with her as well, Dick Mansfield, who had been very involved in the diocese, was in, just very involved in the church in so many ways.
Yeah.
And that really was a push. They came together as a
Yeah,
pair
they did.
in so many ways.
Mm.
And I don't know if anyone ever challenged the name Mother Mary, but gosh, I always called her Mother Mary. It went together.
It did. And she was a grandmother. I mean, she was that grandmother that would just give you a big hug. I loved meeting her. She was obviously my predecessor. Her husband with Joe Tuchansky, Cliff Johnson, Rick Oden, Ethel Merwin, and there's one other.
Spears, that's Spear.
George Spear and Mick Heller built this building.
Yeah.
They're the ones that built this building.
George was very big.
What's interesting though,
And
is
Tuchansky too.
George and
she was a little
they
more
were
removed.
very close.
What's interesting is Mary Mansfield did not. Her role was only to lead the vestry as they made the decisions. She was very hands-off in the day-to-day life of building the congregation, of building this building. Her husband was more involved in the building of this building. You may remember that.
So talking with Mary all the time.
Yep.
But Mary was very, very firm in just what her responsibilities were
Mhm.
here all along. You know, she really had her kind of, these are the boundaries.
Yep.
And she was very clear with the boundaries.
And she wasn't full-time.
Yeah.
She was 3/4 time.
Was Cardenas full time?
I don't remember, but I believe they tried for a couple years
And it didn't
and
work
it
out.
didn't work
But
because
it's a
of
different-
finances.
Two different types of personalities. And
They-
the way they.
That's
Very
exactly right.
very
And
Different.
that's an idea, Barbara, or an example of where, now there are many other experiences, but one of the ways in which a priest in charge versus a rector really became useful, right?
Yeah, the Episcopal Church doesn't have a generic name. Like, for instance, in the JCOGs, if that was a woman or a man, you could say rabbi, right? And in the Lutheran Church or Congregational Church, you just say pastor. So you don't get hung up in this mother, father.
Well, and I'll tell you, it has been one of our biggest challenges
Kind of thing.
since we ordained ordaining women.
A shame.
There's parents, right? So if a male priest title is father, then it would be in the patriarchal manner, which that is, would be mother.
Yeah.
But Barbara, mother is very difficult for many, many people.
It is, and I ran into that with our Episcopal Church down in Pleasantville, New York. So it's too bad that you don't call maybe everybody just rector. I mean, I think pastor, I like the name pastor. It has a great connotation. I do call Dan pastor most of the time because I'm used to it. We used to years ago have to say pastor in the last name, then it went from pastor to the first name. But you can always call a pastor just pastor without a name, which makes it easy.
That's
Make
right.
it, you know.
In the Episcopal Church, the official is called Reverend.
No, Reverend, that's right.
Both male and female, the Reverend.
Yeah, and it's the same in the Lutheran Church, the Reverend, but you don't
Oh,
call
you
it,
have a female priest, you call her Reverend.
yeah.
Right.
We had one in the preceding church, was a woman, and she was Reverend.
And so you
Reverend,
just called it without a name, you just said, hello, Reverend?
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, well, then that's exactly what I was meaning, that just to kind of,
yeah.
So this is also, so a couple things. Reverend means holy one. Okay? Reverend, holy one. So any ordained person of any denomination in the Christian tradition is technically, and rightly so, the Reverend or Reverend.
yeah. So when you write a letter to a pastor, you would say the Reverend Paul Eggensteiner or something, the regular Dan.
So my title, my formal true title is the Reverend Dr.
Right.
Rick Swanson.
What's it when you get the right reverend?
That's a bishop. A
That's
bishop becomes a reverend. Now, bishops are much more equal, right? They're bishop. They're not father, they're not mother, they're not something of this nature, right there.
They're bishop.
Bishop Andy, right? Sorry.
Couldn't make it.
Yeah, oh, yes, you would. And so, you know, there's two things about titles from there on out. You know, even the Reverend, I believe, are honorific. They're solely earned and they're honorific. It's the reason that if someone, this is my personal experience, right? I never correct anyone. If somebody wants to call me Reverend, somebody wants to call me Pastor, if someone wants to call me Father, if someone wants to call me Rick, I'm honored. I'm honored, right? That because they're all saying something about my role in this congregation and my faith.
Your,
Okay, that's right. They're acknowledging who I am.
yeah.
The diocese, remember how I keep talking about the diocese as the center? Back in the old days, the bishop determined your title.
Yeah.
So in Minnesota, it was known as a low church diocese. And so a guy I met once under the old, back in the 60s, he graduated seminary and he was about to be ordained. And he said, blah, 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 Father so-and-so. And the bishop said, there are no fathers in this diocese. There is Mr. The Reverend Mr. we'll say Swanson. The bishop, the priest, you know, or the about to be priest. We're talking like hours before his ordination. Straightened up and said, yes, Bishop, Mr. So-and-so. If you cross the river, the Hudson River in Minnesota, or whatever, St. Croix River, and you went to the Diocese of Eau Claire, you would be corrected in the other way. There are no misters in this diocese. This is Reverend Father Swanson. And this is the way, remember when I talked about high church, low church on Sunday and all these stuff?
Yeah.
This is how crazy it became. So you will see still to this day, some people would write the Reverend Mr., the Reverend Father, the Reverend Mother, so on and so forth. It's all foolery to me. It really is.
You think all denominations and have
Much less about titles. Much less about titles. Deb, you were
Well,
going to
I
say.
was just reminded what you said about Belle Sanders at her
Oh.
her memorial service.
Yes.
Is that Belle greeted you that first Sunday
Yep.
when you were here and just said,
I call no one father anymore.
Right, anymore. You are Rick to me.
You are Rick to me. And
Yeah,
I
but she came from a good Presbyterian background.
that's right.
You know, you have this mix. The
That's right.
Catholics who are here, the Protestants who are here, you know,
and would be father.
so.
And right. And that's why I say, right, call me Rick. And you all know that. And many people, out of respect for the office I hold, will say Reverend, will say Father. But it really, the church, you're right, Barbara, is to me, this is a part of that lowering of the triangle of our church.
Yeah. I think I called you pastor for the very first and realized that wasn't the right word.
For about the first year. And you said, am I supposed to call you father? And I said, do you remember what I said, Barbara?
No, I don't. I just know I caught on, but
I remember saying to you, I don't care.
no. It's very respectful to me, that term, I think is respectful and so I've always been comfortable with that, but, yeah.
And he just said, well, what about Mr. Swanson? I will say this, I feel like my dad. He was a teacher with Mr. Swanson.
And
It seems to me that, and maybe this is just, the. But, just in time of that, how we've gotten to know you, more personally. And just the individual that you are, in addition to the priest, is that your attendance at the many events here of out there in the community, et cetera, and that of seeing you in aspects of your everyday life, you are Rick. And I can't help but think that over time, of just the contrast of over the 15 years that you've been here, of kind of like an evolution, I might say.
And the evolution, Deb, that I've learned is in two ways: inside this church, in the community, the faith community, and outside. So when I do ministry, right, outside, my title is used.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it identifies me with all of you. That's what's most important. It identifies me here. You all, in your own comfort zone, will use it or not use it. And that's that quote given in that freedom within a family. And so Mary went by Mother Mary in these same ways. She wasn't going to correct anyone, right? Many women now are using reverend in the Episcopal Church, not pastor, because and the reason is this: clergy, priest, not clergy, because Zarina's a clergy person too, okay, are ordained to serve. We're not going to die quickly here. Are ordained to be priests, pastors, and teachers. All three roles. And so to say pastor is only one role. Rabbi, right, would be another name, right, you could use. Please don't. That's my good friend across the street. And then there's the priest. Well, what the historic name, of course, or title for a priest?
Yeah. What's the matter, honey?
Not
goes back
something.
to wait.
And it's not something that has been our tradition. Many women will do pastor or reverend because, Barbara, of everything you've said there. The uncomfortable.
very much like the medical profession, sometimes I always stay with like Dr. Hill could be my daughter, but a lot of people call her Rosie. I prefer to keep that kind of separation, at least in the medical community, and I call her doctor.
And I too, because I think there's an honoring of their community. I get that.
But she's perfectly happy with Rosie, but I just never have called my doctors anything but doctor. So I think it's kind of the same thing. I just haven't evolved very much, I guess.
Let's quickly finish this specifically on St. John. So then we built this building, and it was about a 30-year dream to build this building. Starting the collection of money started around Jim Raines, around 1980, is when the parish started to begin really dreaming, and they had this come close, and then the Jody experience was really defeating and really brought people like, oh my gosh, we'll never be able to build a building. They decided to go forward with it. If you've been around a church that builds a building, it's chaos, it's painful. Some people leave, some people stay. It all happened. That's just reality, right? They looked at more than three pieces of property. One by George Spear up by Stowe Family Dentistry. If any of you knew a couple of you knew where Ethel Merwin, Ethel and George Merwin, right where the or the elementary school is. There's a little 3-story condo that's fairly
Yeah,
small. We looked at that piece of property. And there was something down in the lower village
Across from Mansfield Dairy.
across from Mansfield Dairy, or removing this building and building on this property where a parking lot is. There was a house, a small ranch style house. So you know what we did? We bought the house. They picked up this building, the old building. It is now in the village. As a part of the historical society. It was sold for $2, you know, that nice way of doing it. And Bishop Ely consecrated the building in September of 2007. And then I arrived around 2010. And that's our history in a very tight nutshell. And what a parish is. Okay, and what we didn't do, I do want to mention this, are our 3 deacons, because each one has played a very important part in our lives as a congregation. First was Elise Braun. Some of you knew her, some of you didn't. Elise was ordained out of this parish to the ministry of serving those in nursing homes. Okay, that was her ministry. And she was ordained with a woman named Peggy Massauer, who's still alive and a deacon down in South Burlington, something like that, at Stowe Community Church, because the St. John's maybe fits 80 people. And so between the 2 parishes, they came to Stowe Community Church. Bishop Swanson arrived and did that ordination. And she served never formally at St. John's, but this was her church. And she was deeply involved at the beginning of the women's spirituality. Because Bishop Ely wasn't available, I did her funeral in 2016. That is very, very uncommon and unheard of. Bishops do clergy persons' funerals. Then, around the time of the building of the new building, a woman named Jackie Arbuckle, again a priest in the diocese, same era of ordination as Elise Braun, was placed here by the bishop to do diaconal ministry. Deacons serve the world. They bring the church to the world, and they bring the world to the church and connect them. And Jackie was here only about 3 years, left before I arrived, but was here during part of that interim, right, Deb? Something of this nature. And then, of course, Zarina, which you almost all knew, right? I think you all knew her. So
Are the deacons paid, Rick?
they were not, and really they are not. We offered Zarina a teeny small stipend because of how far she lived, right? To just help with some gas. Deacons usually always get a few small benefits for professional development, right? Going to a conference, something.
You got that.
And Zarina got that, yeah. And then in time, this diocese chose to allow deacons to be paid very minimally so that they could participate in the church pension fund, not for a pension, but for clergy development. There are things that the church pension does and offers for clergy development. So that's why we turned Zarina from a little travel allowance to a stipend so that she could do that. So
We have to get another deacon?
so what we would need to do, and the vestry would need to do this, is request a deacon from the bishop, because bishops place deacons. That's how they're placed. I had written Bishop Ely and said, I want a deacon. So 2 years later, he said, do you still want a deacon?